And we're back. Welcome to another episode of the What Do We Know podcast. My name is Zach with my brother JP. And we're back after being off for another couple weeks. I was in California for a week. JP was in Florida for a little while. Uh, enjoying life. Life happens. How,
Yeah,
how, how have you been doing the past couple weeks? We haven't talked in a little bit.
yeah, pretty good. I've been, I guess the only new thing really is I'm just trying to increase my endurance. So I signed up for another triathlon in September,
Another one.
and it's longer than the first one. So
Oh,
I'm trying to ramp up and get ready for it.
that's fun.
Yeah, it's not
How?
too late to sign up if you want to join me.
Oh gosh, I don't think I could do it. I hate running. I actually have
Yeah.
I don't I think this is at least somewhat hereditary, but I have a really bad ankle. My
Oh,
right
really?
my right ankle especially, like if I walk for too long, it gets really sore, and
Huh.
I know dad had that as well. Like he always had ankle braces around. He gave me one when I was a teenager.
Huh.
Um
I never knew that.
but have you ever had ankle problems?
No, but
Hmm.
I remember you had flat feet when we were kids.
I do
Maybe
have
that's
very
what
flat
it
feet. Apparently,
is.
flat enough that I am not a candidate to be drafted into the army because I can't march.
Oh wow, you can probably get orthotics or something and help correct that. I would think.
Yeah,
But
there are various options for that, but I don't know. Maybe I'm too lazy. I don't really use them.
yeah,
But
so
our grandfather Oppo had flat feet, and
oh yeah,
I
I
remember
forgot
Mom
about
would
that.
always comment that he would walk like a duck.
Yeah,
And I think I do the same. Like my feet kind of go out a little bit.
huh? Yeah, yeah. Maybe running's not the best option then.
Yeah, I do need to find more options to stay active, and my wife gets on me all the time about it. But having the dogs helps. You know, we're walking the dogs in the woods every day and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah. How about you? How have you been in the past few weeks? You got to go out west for a bit.
we did. I was there Tuesday to Tuesday, so a full week um, for work, and then my wife flew out for the weekend, and we stayed with some friends, and it was a really nice trip, but just exhausting. I mean, I felt like I was there forever, and I
Huh?
was not that I like got homesick, but like by the end, I was just like longing to sort of be back in my own space, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then at the tail end of that trip, um, Shelby ended up getting COVID.
Oh, geez.
Uh, like started I thought I was just having I didn't get it. I never tested positive. I tested negative the whole way.
Huh?
I thought I was just having allergies because there was pollen out there, and I was getting really congested. And then Shelby started not feeling great. This was at like the last day of the trip, and we got home and she tested positive for COVID. So,
Jeez. Yeah.
um, but she kicked it pretty quick, only a couple days. So it's kind of a downer on on the end of the trip. But um, COVID it's winding down, but it's still out there. You know, it's still very much a concern.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's going to be, what is it, endemic or whatever, just always around now. But
Yeah,
we have vaccines and more immunity. So, just another thing at this point.
yeah, I suppose so. And I think I had a booster shot about a month ago, like pretty recent. So
Hmm.
I think my immunity was probably higher. And
Yeah.
Shelby has gotten vaccinated too, but she hasn't had a booster in that time frame anyway. And so I don't know if that contributed to maybe my immune system or my antibodies were higher at the time because I mean she tested positive and I tested negative, and I mean we're sharing the same space all the time. It's kind of
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
It's a very weird virus.
Yeah. It is interesting too how, like, you get set up in your spot, and then it's kind of nice to go travel, but it's also nice to get back to your spot.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
Just what I mean, like it's nice to be in your own bed, and it's nice to have all your things around, and also, for me working from home all the time, it's really nice to be in my home office.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but the work trip was great. It was great to get to see some of my coworkers that I haven't seen in 3 years.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Um, 3 years? Has it been that long? 2 years? I guess it has been three.
Huh.
So yeah, it was just crazy. So and we had some new folks on the team, so I got to meet them for the first time. And as great as remote work is, and I had transitioned fully into remote work a little over 6 months before the pandemic even started, and then everybody went remote. So I already wanted to go in that direction, and I feel like I'm successful at that. But there is something about the face-to-face, interaction, being in the same room with somebody and being able to look them in the eye and shake their hand. Um, it's not something that I feel like I want to do every day, where it's not worth a commute for me, really. But
Right.
it's great
Yeah.
to be able to have that sporadically every now and then.
Yeah. 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 I definitely found like being in the office. There's definitely pluses on it, but I don't know. For the type of stuff I do, I feel like most of the time when I go into the office, I'm just sitting there doing the same thing I do at home.
Yeah,
Stare at a screen and just get lost solving puzzles.
yeah, and on this work trip, it was everyone was looking forward to it for the most part, and I mean, we were there for whatever 3 days, 3.5 days or something, doing work, but like nothing really got done really because it's sort of like a vacation. You're expensing everything, got a hotel room, you're going out to eat, the company's paying for everything.
Yeah.
You're not in your normal environment to be able to whatever your process is, working on tickets, or everything's just different. And so like it there's value in that face-to-face interaction, but the normal day-to-day work nothing really got done.
Yeah.
In terms of what you're trying to accomplish in your sprint or whatever. But to me, like, that's okay. There's value in keeping those relationships up, and having a little FaceTime. So all in all, really nice. It was great to be able to be back in San Diego, where I lived for 5 years, and we did some more touristy things that we didn't even do when we lived there. Like, so it was fun, and the food was excellent. I think I ate 6 burritos in like 3 days or something ridiculous. uh, yeah, I miss the Mexican food a lot. It's spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Cool.
it's great to bounce around. Great to not just stay in your house for 2 years.
Yeah. Definitely.
Have at least the option to travel a little bit. So
Yeah.
um, okay, so in terms of topics this week, um, I sort of felt compelled in some ways that based on what's been going on in the world and in this country to have a discussion about guns, which is a really hot button issue right now. And honestly, I feel like it's been that way for the past maybe 15 years, um, you know, intermittently. We had the mass shooting in Buffalo, New York, and then the horrific elementary school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And there's some other ancillary ones as well that have cropped up. But right now, at the national level, there's just more calls for regulation and gun safety, and all kinds of stuff is getting a lot of heat right now. So I thought it would be an interesting topic, both to talk about, maybe specifically about mass shootings, but also guns in general. I'm just curious, sort of where you stand, and especially in light of our shared past with our father killed himself with a gun. Very polarizing topic, it seems.
Yeah. Definitely.
Where do you want to jump off from in there?
Um, I guess like maybe the idea of like the Second Amendment and like the right to bear arms, and like with I guess with most like questions and policy is I tend to err on the side of freedom, you know. So
Mhm.
like I hesitate to see regulation, that's if it's either overly burdensome or misguided or any something like that. Um, so I would tend to, I'm kind of skeptical of adding more rules unless they're really necessary. But obviously something is obviously stuff, like we can't keep having these types of tragedies, and they've been happening for a long time and just continuing. And I don't know what the data is, maybe even increasing in frequency, or certainly just continuing. Uh, but like I think the question is like, what's the answer? Like, how do you effectively address the issue? Is it you just strip uh, gun ownership rights from everybody, but then criminals can still, I mean, they're not following laws, so that, and there's already, however many tens of thousands or millions or whatever it is of guns out there. So it's not realistic to like be able to recall and eliminate all of those,
Mhm.
so then you're going to have like outlaws basically with guns and people that follow the rules without guns. So that's going to create problems of its own. Also, like the whole idea of the Second Amendment and like the ability to have what was like a well regulated militia or whatever it was, is the idea to check government power and like the risk of tyranny.
Right.
Not that with like advanced weaponry today and like having even like an assault rifle or whatever, like citizenry, I don't think really is any real match for like a government that has become like authoritarian and heavy-handed and like basically like a police state. Like like technology, it's just there's too much disparity. Like so, I,
I would
I
agree. Actually, let me challenge you on this one because
yeah
I think I've somewhat changed my mind on this in the past 5 years, maybe because I see what you're saying, and I
yeah
used to think that too. But the argument that I've heard against that is look at the efforts of the United States military in the Middle East, fighting against basically like sheep farmers, right? Who have
yeah
AK-47s. Um, and it's like there's a just gigantic technological disparity with advanced weaponry between, say, the United States and the Iraqi army or in Afghanistan, and yet these like sort of dug in countrymen would continue to pose a to be a very challenging adversary based on I don't know what they believe in. The will to survive, the will to defend their country based on how they see it. They see us as the enemy, and I don't like. Obviously, there's nothing I can do against an F-22, but if you have your sort of, I guess, well-regulated militia, you have your neighborhood, your city, your state, just everyday people organized, even loosely, with a strong will, um, you know, to defend what they believe in. I like that. I sort of that's still a formidable force in some weird way, unless the overarching power like is literally willing to just genocide the entire country. You know what I mean? Like we could go
yeah
into Iraq and like literally drop nuclear arms and destroy everything about them, but that's not really what any modern Western nation is going to do. So
yeah
I see what you're saying, but I'm not sure. Like I sort of see the value still in in that sort of the value of that individual with their small arms or whatever as they band together against a tyrannical government. Not that you're guaranteed to be victorious, not that you wouldn't get wiped out, but you at least have some sort of fighting chance. I think we've seen that over the past 30 years in the Middle East.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you might be right. I mean, I, yeah. I mean, and I guess there are going to be uh, caveats and like, well, first of all, it's kind of a hypothetical scenario having a tyrannical government and you having to like have locally organized resistance to that. You know, like
Hmm.
hopefully that never comes to that point in the U.S.
Certainly.
And yeah, like the very minimum, uh, like having people with weapons is going to be there's going to be a greater chance of being able to resist tyranny than not having weapons.
Right.
So, but and then the other thing is like the well-regulated militia part is, I think that I mean, I don't know, for my limited, direct experience, because I'm not involved in any of that stuff. It just seems more hypothetical or like theoretical than actual. Like I know there are some like like usually kind of labeled extremist groups that get all uh, armored up and go and they train and all that stuff. But I think for the most part, like people that own guns are not in militias.
Okay.
So, and maybe that would change if the government started becoming really authoritarian, or like became a police state or whatever. But
Yeah.
so yeah. But anyway, like I think there still is value in the right to bear arms, and just erring on the side of freedom anyway. So then the question is, like, how do you deal uh, with people, you know, murdering other people using guns, like abusing the right to bear arms, really?
Right.
Um, and I know, like, there's the whole assault weapon ban idea. But from There's a podcast from a few years ago, but apparently the data back then, at least, was showing that universal background checks would actually be more effective in reducing mass shootings than assault weapon bans. So,
Well, so before we get into that, let's clarify some things, because the assault weapon moniker is one that irks me.
yeah,
Because like, what is an assault weapon? It doesn't actually mean anything. What people mean, what people mean when they say assault weapon is a scary looking black rifle, semi-automatic, may or may not have plastic on it to make it look tactical. Uh, but it's basically a some sort of rifle that they associate with military use,
mm, yeah,
and it doesn't mean anything. There's no actual definition. When you say assault weapon or assault rifle, I think a lot of people get confused and they say, "Oh, well, this is an automatic weapon." Automatic weapons are banned in this country. They've been banned for a long time.
right.
There are some that still exist, and some that you can acquire legally, but there are not new ones being made, and the ones that do exist are exorbitantly expensive, and there's a whole nother level of what it takes to get one of those weapons, and you don't see them being used to commit any of these problems. So it's functionally a non-issue as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
But you take two weapons that fire the same caliber bullet, maybe fire the exact same ammunition. One of them is black, scary looking. One of them has wood on it and looks more like a
Huh.
hunting rifle. People are upset about the AR-15 and guns like it because they look that way. And they have no problem with quote unquote hunting rifles. It's the
Uh,
exact same rifle, maybe made by a different manufacturer, has the exact same capabilities, fires the exact same ammunition. One of them is classified as an assault weapon by people who know nothing about guns, and the other is not. So it's a very common talking point that I don't think makes any sense.
is there anything with like semi-automatic? Like it's not, you have to, like, as many times you can pull the trigger as how many shots. You don't have to like re-chamber a bullet, or like chamber a new one, or so it's just you can fire faster.
Correct. Semi-automatic means you pull the trigger one time, one bullet comes out.
Yeah.
An automatic weapon, you hold the trigger down, and the rate of fire is determined by the firearm, and it will just continually shoot.
Yeah.
So
So
you still
is
have
that
to
what they
pull it.
mean by
I don't think
assault?
I no, they don't. I think in general, most people who don't know much about guns don't know what they mean.
Yeah.
Um, so some of okay, when you say an assault weapon, military style assault weapon, these are the terms that get thrown around. I don't think anybody knows what that means. Well, like what specifically do you mean other than a gun that looks scary?
Yeah. I mean,
Like
I just assumed it was automatic and semi-automatic guns, but I never really looked deeply into it either, so I don't know.
yeah, like I said, automatic weapons are functionally not an issue. They're already banned.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, people get upset about the AR-15. The AR-15. Most people think that the AR and AR-15 is assault rifle.
Hmm.
Seems to make sense. It's not what it stands for. It stands for um, Armalite, the
Hmm.
weapons manufacturer. And so the reason that people key in on that one, as far as I can tell, is uh, it's basically the civilian version of the M16.
Hmm.
So civilian version meaning it's not an automatic weapon. It's the same parts, same model, essentially. It just doesn't have an automatic fire capability.
So could it be like guns that are designed or based off of designs for like gunfights versus hunting stuff? Like, like a like I mean, I don't know much about guns honestly, but would you use an AR-15 for hunting like game?
I guess
Or
some people do. I mean, I don't know.
yeah,
To me, it doesn't matter
right.
whether you want to use it for hunting or home defense or whatever. I mean, it's functionally no more, I suppose, proficient of a weapon as many of the other a gun of the exact same sort of dimensions and sort of the same fire type, the same ammunition, the same whatever that just has wood on it and is used quote unquote for hunting.
Yeah.
People get afraid. They're afraid of a black tactical looking weapon because they think it's a military rifle. The military doesn't use AR-15s. It's not capable enough, and so. But in the past 20 years, it has become an incredibly popular rifle, especially because the media makes it sound really scary, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's the boogeyman. So yeah, and the other term that really I guess sort of grinds my gears that these are sort of weapons of war that they're made to kill people.
Hmm.
And what I would say is what is a gun supposed to do if not defend your life, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't understand how that's an argument. Like this is the point of guns, right? Is to offer defense. Or
Or to hunt or whatever.
yeah,
But
let's say you're hunting elk, right? In I don't know, northern Canada. Like you wanna use like a 22 round to hunt an elk, like the little like it's not going to do anything, right? You're just going to cause the animal suffering, just wound it
right.
continuously. So you want to
Yeah.
have a big caliber bullet to bring it down.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's well, there's a number of ways we could take this discussion, but in general, I'm very suspect. I suppose, like you are, of supposedly well-intentioned policies
Right. Yeah.
that will end up not having the intended effect. The other thing is that also really gets on my nerves is common sense gun control, right? It's common sense. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
I don't. Yeah, I've heard that keyword, but I'm not sure what that exactly entails.
People
But
don't know what it entails. That's the
yeah,
problem.
yeah, yeah. It's common sense, I guess. I don't know, but I mean, the thing that seems like a no-brainer is to harden, those quote unquote soft targets. Like, have better security at schools or,
Mm,
like large public gatherings. Um, and people that have concealed carry permits, like people that can, encourage people to learn how to defend themselves against those sort of situations too. You know.
right. And so I think the situation that you saw in Uvalde is even more emblematic of why you can't rely on the police to protect you. You had a situation where
Yeah.
the police are outside of the school not going in.
Well, that might be just like insufficient training, right? Like, I
Whatever the
mean,
reason, right?
yeah,
It doesn't matter.
obviously they misjudged the situation, and people died because of it.
Right.
But that guy apparently got into the school through an unlocked door. Like, I thought
Mm,
that was sort of like security 101 for schools now. Like where in it, what school has unlocked doors anymore? That just
yeah.
seems like a glaring oversight. So there seems like there could be more done to just like provide like basic, what should be, I think, just basic security protocols.
Yeah, and I suppose the counterpoint to that someone would bring up would be we shouldn't have to do this at schools. Um, why do we live in a world where this is the case? And my response to that would be there's a lot of things we shouldn't have to do. Um, but that doesn't change the reality of what is going on in the world.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for solutions, I mean, so like for instance, one of the bills that is being considered as a result of this is raising the age, I believe, to purchase a rifle from 18 to 21. I
All
think the
right.
shooter in Uvalde was 18. Okay, let's say you put that bill into place and it passes and that becomes law, and then that same person freaks out when they're 21 and does the same thing. I mean, is that the solution?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, that seems like that might be an okay compromise. I mean, if you're going to say that somebody can buy a gun, and take on that responsibility before they're mature enough to drink responsibly, like, you know, but it could also be a slippery slope too, right? Like, it gets raised to 21, then it gets raised to 25, and then 35, and then never, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't pass or that it's a bad idea. I don't know. That's for the Congress will sort that out for whatever it's worth. But let's say it does pass, you would potentially have a situation. It's the same argument with like alcohol, where someone would get drafted or volunteer for the military at 18, go through basic training, learn how to handle this weapon, and then in civilian life, it would be illegal for them to touch it or buy it or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to have to be ready and willing to send your 18-year-olds off to war and then regulate all these additional things they can't do in society.
Yeah. So being in the military is a different context. I mean, it's very structured and hierarchical and, like disciplined. So I don't know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a different world. But I mean, my thing is like, if the data really is showing that universal background checks would do more for decreasing these sort of incidents, then
Well, what do you
uh,
mean by universal background checks?
I think that just means like to buy a gun, you have to have a clear background check. So like every gun sale has, you have to have a clean background check of the purchaser. So apparently there's like
That's already law.
but there's loopholes, right? Like
Well,
the
there's the
gun show
so-called
loophole,
yeah.
and
So this is another thing, right? So like what people call the gun show loophole, what they're referring to is private sales of guns. So the law as it sits now is that I, as a private gun owner, could sell you my gun from a private sale as long as I don't suspect that you. I think it's like as long as I don't suspect that you're a felon or something like that. I'd have to double check that. But if you
yeah,
go to a gun show, like an organized gun show, who are the people who are going to be running the booths at the gun show? Sure, maybe there's the odd individual, or like you find some guy in a parking lot or whatever. But it's mostly like entities, like organizations, the local gun store, or manufacturers or something. And all of these things are already required under federal law. You have to background check to sell a firearm to anybody. So when people say we want to close the gun show loophole, or we want universal background checks on private sales, that's fine. But how do you stop Farmer John from selling his gun to Farmer Steve while requiring him to background check Farmer Steve? I don't know how you do that.
Yeah. You'd have to have some kind of way to track guns and
Exactly,
and
that will
hold
never
sellers accountable.
in our lifetime. I don't see anything like that ever passing. People are too
Yeah.
paranoid about the government knowing how many guns they have. Some of
Yeah.
it might be with merit, some of it maybe not. But I don't. I mean, you'd have to have a national register of guns, like automobiles. I don't think that's
Yeah.
realistic, at least in the next 50 years.
Yeah. And I guess maybe a counter argument would be like the guy that did the thing in Texas, he bought his guns legally.
Yeah,
So like he went through that background check. So maybe that background check wasn't robust enough. I don't know. Because apparently there were some red flags with him, like stuff he was posting on social media or whatever. But I don't think background checks go that deep. But
the other problem is, so in that case, yes, that guy did purchase the gun legally. Let me not misspeak. Some of the other incidents are caused by people who are breaking existing laws. So, if you're already breaking the law, are you suggesting that like some additional law would have prevented it? I'm not sure if that makes sense. Maybe it would in some cases, but it's like I sort of relate it to kind of like the war on drugs, or prohibition in the early part of the 20th century on alcohol. You're not stopping these activities. You're not stopping the sale of them. You're simply creating a black market and driving it underground if it is something that people sufficiently are interested in. Even modern day, sex workers, prostitution. It's not like we've eradicated that from anywhere. It's just gone underground, right?
right. Yeah.
So people are going to continue to subvert government's laws for goods and services that have sufficient demand. I think that's true regardless of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's kind of like pick your battles, right? Like only create laws and invest resources in enforcing them that like make sense or
Right.
like worth the cost of enforcing them.
Mm-hmm.
But um and then the other thing is like with the rise of 3D printing and whatnot, you can just like print a gun. So
Right.
I think we're rapidly leaving the age when even in being able to enforce you know prohibiting gun sales or whatever is gonna that's gonna become more difficult. I mean, we're kind of slowly going into that era of being able to print anything on demand.
Right. Yeah. So interesting anecdote. When I lived in California, we went to a gun show at the local fairgrounds, and there's all kinds of guns on display and ammunition and stuff. But California has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. One of them was that so there were I might not get this right, but there were restrictions specifically on AR-15s, and so you couldn't sell an AR-15, but you could sell pieces of an AR-15.
Huh.
So you could buy the barrel, you could buy the stock, you could buy whatever, but there was a very specific part that you could not buy because that would functionally make it a gun, right? I'm not going to get the terms right, but it's the part of the gun that essentially where the serial number would be. It's what they sort of classify as what makes the gun a gun.
It's like the firing pin or something.
It's like the firing mechanism, but specifically the like the carve out in the metal where the bullet rests, something like this. This is a while back, but anyway. So you could buy. Basically, what they would happen is they would sell what I think they called them like the lowers. They'd sell. It's like a vendor of all these lowers, and it's like the full part of the lower part of the gun, but without this part of the metal carved out to make it functional. And then right next to that, they would sell the kit to put on top of that to carve out the metal,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because that they're both legal by themselves. But if you use the kit on the lower on the piece of metal and carve it out, then it becomes illegal to sell. So this is to me is very representative of like what happens when the government starts regulating things is people just find workarounds, right?
Right.
Both of those things are legal by themselves. It's even legal to have that to use the use the kit on the lower part of the gun and carve it out as a private owner. It's just illegal to sell it. So
Oh.
like, what are you really stopping here, right? Like, are you stopping any? If somebody really wants this, are you stopping anyone from getting it?
And it might even be more dangerous if it's, at home, do it yourself, carving out, this piece instead of just, like having a like manufactured process where it's like, well controlled and
Right.
designed and all that.
Right.
So,
And to your point about the 3D printing, like that's gaining a lot of steam, and there are people, trying to make durable weapons out of plastic. But even without plastic, like essentially, it's just a piece of metal. So, are you suggesting that like you can't have metal in certain forms, or the plans for how to not like manipulate the metal are illegal? Like, which part of this is illegal? Is it only that you craft some raw material in some specific way to create something that resembles a gun? Does that become illegal? Like, how do you separate it? I have no idea how you're supposed to effectively draw the line. Your whole point about it's you're going to have all these like crude manufactured guns. Like, is that a better situation than having a something that has some amount of quality control to it? I mean, I don't know. It's very weird discussions about how and where do you draw the line.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like, there's kind of two broad approaches to addressing it. One is like, I want to call it like heavy handed, but like deny, prevent, no, not even preventing the threat, crushing the threat, really. Like, so hardening targets, or trying to, prevent gun ownership, or like preventing people from being able to acquire guns. And then the other side of that is like preventing the desire to do those types of things with guns. So that's like that's also very broad. Better mental health services or whatever, and like promoting community and connection and like the sense of belonging, and uh, you know and also like being like having the American dream accessible, like giving people hope,
Right.
like creating economic conditions that provide opportunity so people can like work on towards their dreams, and they don't feel desperate and they don't feel like they need to turn to violence or, but I mean, none of that's going to be a catch-all. There's always going to be situations where someone just, like just gets frustrated or, they just fall through the cracks or whatever. And then they go do, gruesome stuff. But so I don't know what the solution is, but it seems like you got to look at all the different angles of it and, do what you can where you can.
Yeah, I don't think there's easy answers here. So this might be a good time to. I actually have an article here. It's from. Let me transition this scene. I just was Googling for some different statistics before we started this. This is from Pew Research.org. I mean, I feel like this is pretty reliable data. This is from February of this year. And it's a interesting article that has some various statistics in it about guns, so we could sort of get our head around some real numbers here. This is the first thing I think is pretty striking, which is so where's total? Uh, so this data is from 2020, which says is the most recent complete data set. So you've got 45,000 deaths from gun-related injuries, but over half of that is from suicides. So you're looking at something around 19,000 murders, according to the CDC. Interestingly, of those, 611 involved law enforcement. So let's maybe we shouldn't get into that. That's kind of a different discussion about use of force among
Sure.
police officers. But anyway, I'll leave that for now. I think there's another. Yeah. So here's a graph that's sort of showing gun deaths over time. And it's definitely been trending up. I suspect, so this is from 2020. In the past 2 years, I don't know, but I suspect it's probably still in this range. But I mean, even that is like, I'm probably projecting based on what I think and hear and read from the media, because I don't know. I mean, I don't know the real numbers. Um, but and I suspect this suicide number in the past 2 years since COVID has gone up probably substantially. But anyway, so yeah, it's kind of oscillated up and down.
That is interesting that suicide is higher than murder. I would have thought it'd be the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is specifically from gun deaths.
Yeah,
So I suspect suicide is probably even higher because if you include non-gun deaths.
sure. Yeah.
Um,
Well, I don't know. I mean, I still would. I guess I would have assumed that murder would be higher than suicide, but I guess suicide is just more prevalent than I realized.
yeah. So the other thing about these numbers would be so like mass shootings are certainly incorporated into these numbers, but as horrific of events as those are, they're basically a fraction of the total gun deaths or the total non-suicide gun deaths even. I think there's some statistics down here even more. So, some breakdowns by state. This is sort of interesting actually. Like this is gun deaths per 100,000 people, so it's sort of per capita.
Hmm.
And you see like the Louisiana and Mississippi are sort of strange to me that those are so high, with Texas being right next door and so low. And I would sort of put Texas as, certainly one of the states that is higher on the, I don't know, like gun freedom index or whatever. Like there's certainly a lot of armed people in Texas,
Yeah.
but their per capita deaths are so much lower than the surrounding states. I don't know if that's a function of Texas just has so many people or what, but I
I
mean,
wonder. It would be interesting to see like economic indicators. Like how much desperation I guess is are in those states, and it probably other stuff like healthcare. Like everything from like mortality rates to like infant mortality. Like all those indicators of like socioeconomic conditions.
yeah,
'Cause,
that
Yeah,
would be interesting. And so this data is not broken down by suicide versus murder. This is both of them. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, so like I bet there's an interesting correlation there. I mean, something like Texas has been just an astronomically increasing like economical hub, especially in
right.
tech over the past say 15 years. There's a lot of jobs in Texas and California, versus you think about living in Mississippi. There's drastically less opportunity there. So
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how that might relate. Um, so now it's getting into mass shootings. Here's the mass shooting data. So this is a really troublesome graph. I mean, there's a clear trend upwards in active shooter incidents. How do they define
Hmm.
active shooter? one or more individuals actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. This is really disturbing, and this at this point, like, I feel like going back to the media for a second is that there's a huge onus on the media. Um, it's almost like popularizing this stuff, right? So like, it's people who want an easy way to be famous and get their name on TV. They might think this is an option, and so I'm sort of in the camp now, listening to some different arguments that, for instance, I don't know the name of the Buffalo or Uvalde shooter. I don't know the name. I haven't seen their face. I don't want to know, and I don't want any news outlet to be promoting. Like, don't even show their picture. Well, don't give them that satisfaction. Like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's interesting because like social media really became a thing in the towards the end of the 2010s, right? Or the knots, I guess.
Yeah, really in this area.
And that's kind of yeah, that's where you start seeing this rise. I mean, it'd be interesting to see like back in the 90s, like how that trend looked before. But I wonder how much of it is like just increasing polarization in general, and everyone, not everyone, but there's this perception that like everyone's angry, and it's very easy to go down rabbit holes and just kind of lose sight of the perspective of the other side or other sides to an issue.
Yeah, that's true. That's unfortunate, but I think there's something to that. And then this gets into really interesting data. What types of firearms are most commonly used in murders? So, if I don't know if you saw the numbers yet, but what would you expect to see?
Probably handguns, I would think.
Yeah. So this
Is
is
that what
the
they are?
59% handguns.
Huh.
The so this next sentence is so interesting to me. So rifles, the category that includes guns sometimes referred to as assault weapons, which we sort of talked about that. You're talking about 3% of firearm murders.
Huh. Yeah.
Shotguns were 1%. So everyone gets all upset about the AR-15, about quote-unquote assault weapons, assault rifles. And yet, it would seem to me that if you're trying to reduce gun violence, shouldn't you target, the meat of where the data is coming from? Like, it's a drop in the bucket.
Right.
And this
Yeah,
is for
that's
this is for
interesting.
all rifles. All rifles. Like, handguns are so much more prevalent. And yet the national attention is on AR-15s and weapons like it to regulate them because they look scary. Because the media has imprinted in our heads that these are weapons of war that are, handguns do over an order of magnitude times more damage in terms of deaths nationally per year.
So I guess that makes sense why like background checks would be more effective than like more effective background checks would make a bigger impact than an assault weapons ban if like because those would affect handgun purchases too versus 3% of murders uh, with rifles or assault weapons.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't know if I'm correct about this. I feel like don't you have to be 21 to purchase a handgun?
I don't know. I mean, if they're talking about raising to 21 for assault weapons, then wouldn't that be like all
Oops.
like yeah, I don't know. I would assume handguns are 18, but I don't know.
Let me.
I wonder what else happened. Like, are there more guns in the past 20 years? Like, or like, what are the other things that change that could correlate with this increase in active shooters? Like we talked about social media and whatnot, but like, I wonder what else there is that could account for it.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah, you have to be 18 to buy a shotgun or rifle. You have to be 21 to buy any other kind, which is basically handguns.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
This is at
So
the
it's already
federal
on.
level. This is from the ATF.
Huh.
I'll just put this. Oops, I keep clicking the wrong button. Um,
Well, I would bet the all the attention on assault weapons is because like a lot of times those mass shootings are like the high profile incidents are involving those types of guns.
Absolutely, I think, and that's my point is that they're scary. They get a lot of attention, and right. I mean, like rightfully so. Something like in Uvalde. I mean, you're talking about murdering a bunch of innocent school-aged children. I mean, it's horrific. It's
Right.
there's no other way to describe it. So of course it's going to get national attention, and I think it should get national attention. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but um, on the aggregate, if it depends on what you're talking about. If you're trying to stop, the rise of gun deaths, like let me bring this chart back up. Oops, that's the wrong one. If you're trying to get ahead of this number of getting this in the past say 10 years whatever under control, wouldn't you want to reduce, like where can you have the biggest impact by reducing that number? But I think, I mean, there's another side of it, which is people want to simply reduce the mass shootings, which they should, right? I mean, I get it. It's horrific. Like of just reducing this number, and that gets back into I think what you were talking about. What are the other factors that come into play here? So I think my 2 cents on some of these issues is that I think a lot of people, when they talk about gun control, whether it be banning assault weapons, whatever they think that is, uh, background checks, raising the age of purchase, whatever you want to say, I feel like most people, they really just want to ban guns. Like they don't.
Hmm.
I think if we're being honest with ourselves, that's really what people on the other side of that issue really want. Um, Especially handguns. I mean, it seems crazy to me to just say, well, just get rid of the AR-15 and these problems will go away. That seems so short-sighted to me. Or get rid of any weapons that fall within the parameters that you want to define that are like an AR-15. I mean, let's say that this guy in Uvalde couldn't buy an AR-15. Do you think that he would have had any problems just going and buying a couple handguns and doing the same thing? Like, would he have been less effective? I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, maybe by the time, a few years down the road, he would have not been so angry or whatever. But who knows? I mean, certainly there's still crazy, dangerous 21-year-olds too. So,
Sure. Yeah, it's a really complicated, topic. I don't know that I have the answer either, but I will say that just like what we sort of opened this discussion about, I tend also to want to err on the side of sort of freedom for the individual, and uh, especially when you're talking about, um, I suppose exercising a right that is granted to you in the Constitution to want to have that firearm for protection, home invasion, hunting, whatever you want to say. I don't know that I want to put barriers in place for somebody, for your average citizen to be able to acquire those things. And there's already there are already rules in place. I'm open to at the federal level discussing more rules and going through the legislative process to hash out where we're going to draw those lines. But I really don't want to fundamentally remove that right. And I know that on the world stage that we are somewhat unique of a country in that regard. Um, but I think there's value to it. And so if you remember I believe it was the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand. This was a few
oh,
years
right.
back.
Yeah.
Um, and the New Zealand legislator acted swiftly, literally within a few days, basically. I don't want to misspeak. I don't know that they banned all weapons, but they at their federal level essentially banned all sorts of guns, and this was sort of heralded as this is how it should be done type of thing. And one of the things I've mentioned to you in the past on this show is that I mean, I sort of want the federal government to go through that grinding, slow process when it comes to making laws, because I want there to be ample opportunity for both sides, for checks and balances, to raise
Sure.
points. If you're talking about making a new law that's going to affect all of your citizens, I mean, I want it to go through the ringer. I don't know that anyone should feel good about a bill being presented and 3 days later it's a matter of federal law. I don't think that's, on the whole, I don't think that's good for society, regardless of how emotional any individual event may be. And so I do think that there's something uniquely American about that. I don't know, but I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think just being skeptical of government in general is useful, but um, I don't know. I feel like we still get some of that type of stuff happening, even with all the chaos and uh, you know bureaucracy and whatnot that happens with passing laws. Because you hear about like 1,000-page uh, uh, laws or bills or whatever, and uh, members of Congress have less than 24 hours to read through it and pass it. Stuff like that. It's like how much due diligence is really happening, versus just people doing party line votes or
Right.
like lobbying behind the scenes. So like, I definitely don't think the system is perfect. Um, but yeah, like I think there should be more opportunities, or there should definitely be lots of debate and like thought about changing policies, because there's always a good risk of unintended consequences. But as far as like the gun thing, like, and especially like school shootings, it just seems like the no brainer part of that response should be just hardening those targets, like making sure that there's better security protocols, making sure that police are better trained to respond to those situations. I mean, look, like that one in Texas that happened recently, the police, it seems like, they got it wrong. They thought it was what was like a barricaded shooter versus an active shooter, and they weren't responsive quickly. But the one that happened in, it's like the Parkland, Florida one or whatever, and the
Hmm.
school resource officer, like
Yeah.
he ran the other
Ran
way. He
away.
ran out of the building, like
Right.
probably just panicked or whatever. So like that's another thing. Like you gotta train people that are going to be expected to jump into unanticipated situations, and possibly put their life on the line, without like any real preparation for that specific moment. But I mean, you got to train people for that.
So how did this? So what do you think about uh, the sort of effort to arm teachers? Is that something you would be in support of?
I think there's potential there. Like, I mean, obviously, if you're going to have more guns around, that's more opportunities for something to go wrong, and get into a kid's hands or something, or But I think there's got to be ways to mitigate that too. So uh, it seems like there, that could be an option. Teachers that are interested in having uh, in being armed, and going through some kind of training so they know what they're doing, and you know how to like safely secure that firearm and whatnot. Um, and of course, you have to like make sure that maybe they go through some kind of like enhanced background check process to make sure that they don't have like psychological problems where they're going to potentially lose it or something and become get mad at some kid being a jerk. I don't
Sure,
know.
sure.
But yeah, I mean, and the other thing is, and this is kind of like broadening out to just policy in general, is um, a lot of this stuff seems like decisions that can or maybe even should be made on a more local level,
Mm.
like like school districts or counties or states, like let push that decision making down for how to respond to this stuff. And and then see what works in places, and other places with stuff that's not working they can learn. Like that's kind of like that whole decentralized command type of system.
All right.
So, and I think that is a useful approach for a lot of issues that, you know, it seems like there's often a default response is to go to like the highest level, whether
Yeah.
it's the Supreme Court or whether it's Congress or executive orders from the president, and just like do this top down approach. But that seems like it's more brittle, more prone to like out of touch or uninformed decisions because they're just further removed from the actual issues at hand. um, and also it's like trying maybe to apply a one size fits all solution to what can be very like different regions and cultures, like subcultures in the country. Like
Right.
there's something to be said about self-governance, and like trying to like push self-governance down to the lowest levels that it reasonably could be
Right.
implemented. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm also in favor. I'm in general in favor of that with most kinds of policy decisions. I will say, so the whole arming of teachers thing, um, people get upset about this. Say, I'm an educator, I shouldn't have to be, a policeman too, or they don't. I just want to teach kids. I don't want to have a gun. And I think like the way that I would feel comfortable about it, and the argument that I've heard that seems to make sense to me is nobody would force you to do anything.
right.
But
Yeah.
let's say, like, imagine you're an ex-military, veteran, and you decide to get into teaching, and you have military training. You know how to handle a firearm, and you live in a state that has, say, concealed carry, and you have a concealed carry permit. Are you really suggesting that that person and the school and the children at that school would be safer by that person not having a gun? That doesn't make any sense to me. So it seems to me that if you, like you said, if that's something you want to do and you have the training for it, or you're willing to get the training, and whatever the rules are, whatever kind of restrictions you wanted to put into place, I don't know why you would deny that person that ability, especially because, I mean, not universally, but certainly very widespread, is schools are sort of regarded as gun-free zones, right? You put up your
Right.
sign at the
Yeah.
entrance, this is a gun-free zone. Well, I mean, how is that not an open invitation for somebody to get a gun and come in there and wreak havoc, right? Because there's no guns. Do you feel safer because you put up a sign that made it a gun-free zone?
Right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't. This
Exactly.
is
It's a
completely
soft target.
backwards to me.
Yeah.
So there's another argument about that I've heard. We protect the president with guns. We protect congressmen, senators with guns. We protect, our local city council meetings or whatever with guns. We protect sporting events with people with guns. We protect any high value target with guns, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
anything that is important. And maybe you don't think it should have to be like that. You're upset at the way that the world works and that this is the reality that we live in. And I might agree with you, but that doesn't change the reality, right?
Right.
So, I mean, anything that is of any amount of value, whether it be at the state level or federal level, you talk about, government buildings or military bases, or, I don't know, some kind of area where there's technology or even data centers. I mean, like, we protect things with protective instruments that are of value to us. It seems completely backwards to me to mandate that you cannot protect children with guns.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, like, you hear of there being two Americas, like there's just a pretty big cultural divide between what tends to be more liberal urban, um, you know, uh, lifestyle, and then a more like rural conservative lifestyle. And, like it tends to be more gun ownership out in the rural conservative areas. So it just be, people just are not familiar with guns. Like they don't have direct
Sure.
experience with guns. Maybe they never owned a gun or shot a gun, really been around guns. So like just really not having any direct experience to draw from. You know?
Right. And it totally makes sense if you're that rancher in Wyoming to have firearms, right? Like not
Yeah,
only to protect your maybe you're protecting your cattle or whatever it is, but in places where the population is not quite as dense, you can't rely on that police officer to get to you in a timely fashion. Even in places where it is dense, you can't rely on that. But
yeah,
there does seem to be this push that no, you don't need a gun. You just call 911. And the folks that seem to be making that argument, paradoxically, also seem to be people who are on the side of like the defund the police type of
uh,
argument, and it's like
yeah,
what do you want to do? You want to remove all the guns from civilians and put them in the hands of the people that you detest and
yeah,
only have them? And I think another interesting thought experiment is if you're against guns is to say, well, okay, you don't want people to have guns, but say, are you okay with police officers having guns? Are you okay with the military having guns? Are you okay with the Secret Service having guns? Can anyone have a gun? And I think if you're honest with yourself, at some point in that chain, you go, yes, it's reasonable for them to have a gun. And so then you kind of have to ask yourself, well, it's not that I'm anti-gun. I'm kind of pro-gun. I'm just pro-gun for certain people.
hmm, yeah,
And then you have to ask yourself, well, if I'm pro-gun for certain people, and the people that I'm pro-gun for are agents of the government, are you not the least bit skeptical about the government? Like, do you trust that the government and uniquely the government can make those decisions and should have the authority to wield that kind of weapon? This was a whole thing when when Donald Trump was president, and there was all some of these same kind of arguments were being made. We needed to ban guns and give up guns, have federal buyback programs, but they also hated Donald Trump and called him Hitler. And I saw a meme of somebody that had a sign that said, "Give your guns to Hitler." Like, how does that make sense? You want to de-arm the populace and arm this authoritarian figure only uniquely? These arguments don't make any sense to me.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I get that as a value as a thought experiment, but it's also kind of irrelevant because there are guns, like they exist. So, like, like no one gets to decide who can get a gun, who can't. Like guns are around, and even if you ban them, if you're motivated and you really want to get one, you can get one. I mean,
Right.
even in countries where guns are banned, like they go to other countries, they could go to black market, like print a gun on the printer. Like it's just a fact of life.
So what you
So
would be do is you would be removing guns from the people who are honest, who would give up the guns. So you'd essentially you'd remove the guns from the exact people that you would trust to have the guns. Essentially, the people who are
yeah,
sort of good people, who are honest, who are going to follow the law. The people who
yeah,
aren't going to follow the law, it doesn't matter anyway. They're going to have them whether you make them illegal or not.
yeah,
So it's another great example, I think, of there is no perfect solution. Let's not pretend that there's a perfect solution. Life is only about trade offs. And I don't feel comfortable telling the average American citizen that they can't have a gun should they want one to, say, protect their family. Maybe it makes them sleep better at night. They go through proper training or whatever the protocols are. How does that make sense? Especially you get in these situations like, I don't know if you saw this story, but the district attorney in San Francisco has been recalled
hmm,
because this guy had put into place these measures that he's not going to prosecute theft basically less than
oh,
$1,000. So what are you
yeah,
incentivizing? You're incentivizing people to go rob stores, and that's what happens. Exactly what you see.
yeah,
I think even like Walgreens or something like completely shut down their stores in the city because they're just getting nonstop vandalized, and the city officials won't do anything about it because they don't want to prosecute theft. So like the city's not going to do anything about it, and these people are going to come rob you, and they might be armed. Are you telling me that store owner who wants to defend his property can also not be armed? How does this make sense?
yeah. There's multiple problems there, but I don't know. I don't know how some people come up with the like. I get I get like well-intentioned policies, but some things are just it just seems stupid. Like or short-sighted. I guess I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, Mike Tyson, world famous boxer, has a quote that says, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth."
oh yeah,
Right? So you might hate the idea of guns, you might want to ban them, but when that home invader comes in and you don't have a way to defend yourself and you call 911 and the cops aren't coming for 10 minutes, you're going to tell me you don't wish that you had a gun
right.
to defend yourself? In the Wild West, it was they called it the peacemaker, the equalizer. The whole idea is the fact that it's a deadly weapon, that it removes the physical disparity between you and a would-be attacker. So I have no problem with guns being, you know, devastatingly powerful weapons. That is the point of a gun, so
Yeah,
that a frail 90-year-old woman is on the same footing as a bodybuilder 20-year-old man. Like, it doesn't matter.
I feel like there's a parallel there with like the military. Like if you're not supporting the military, like okay, yeah, like war is awful, right? But you're saying like you don't want to have a robust defense
Right.
against would-be aggressors, and you don't want to deter them. Like ideally deter them from attacking you, or so
Right.
I mean and of course, there is, like if you build up a strong military, there is the risk of abusing that power, and that happens. But
Right.
I don't think that's really an argument against having a military, having you know a robust ability to defend yourself, your nation.
Yeah.
Like the same thing, just on an individual level.
What do you think about sort of the rest of the world in terms of gun policy versus the United States? So
I don't
there's a
know enough about it, but I mean, it seems like some of the, like I guess in Britain, guns are illegal, and or maybe for the most part, I'm not sure, like the rest of the Western world or whatever. And then it seems like in a third world, I don't even know if it matters what the law is, because it's just seems like it's just more chaos, and there are guns whether they're legal or not. But
yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
I think you do hear like mass shootings being described as a uniquely American problem. I don't know if that's completely a fair characterization. Um, there's certainly, and actually, just within the time of these couple stories coming out over the past few weeks, um, I'll browse. I usually will browse the headlines of the day, even if I don't click on any stories. But one that caught my eye, and I just brought it up here, was, now Nigeria is not what I would call first world necessarily, but there was a shooter in Nigeria that killed 28 people in a church.
Jeez.
So I mean, the world is full of would-be evildoers, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's now this is simply one anecdote and one story. To be able to form a narrative about what is actually happening, you'd have to look at aggregate data, certainly. I'm not suggesting that this is an example to say that it's not uniquely American or whatever, but um, there are many things that I think America does right, many things that maybe it does wrong, but you sort of get the good with the bad in a lot of ways. Uh, and like I often say, there isn't a perfect solution. You're simply talking about trade offs. Um, it's great that maybe there are fewer mass shootings in, say, Norway. I don't know if that's true. I assume it is, but um, you know, the sovereignty of any given nation in this world. The whole point is that they sort of get to make their own decisions, right? And that one country can do things differently from the next. Um, so I don't know. it's for each country to decide. I do think, without sounding, I suppose, like I'm on my national soapbox, I suppose, I do think there are qualities about the United States that make it unique on the world stage. Maybe one of those is gun policy, uh, but you sort of have to take the bad with the good, unfortunately. And so, like you're saying, I would prefer to look for solutions, maybe to make those targets harder, as you said, or explore. Even I'm okay with various gun control measures. We already have gun control measures. I'm okay with debating that and figuring out where to draw the line and how to do it. But I don't know that I would be willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater and sort of just say it's all banned. Even if there was functionally some way to remove all the weapons from society, even if you could do that, I don't know that I would be for that kind of a measure.
Yeah. I think it would help to have like hard data too, um, like a thorough analysis of what other countries do, like what their policies are, and like their outcomes, and like maybe you could dig uh, into like have like data based uh, policies, like so you could project, I don't even know how you would do this, but I'm sure you could at least put together models for it. Like, if you implement this policy, then you're going to likely reduce gun violence by X amount, and then this policy by Y amount. And you can like have like quantitative measures to evaluate trade-offs, like,
Right.
you know, if something is going to have a drastic effect, maybe it's worth, you know, that whatever it is, loss of freedom or increased costs of enforcement or whatever it is.
However, the analysis shakes out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think there is a lot of that. I mean, maybe there is, and it's just too like, uh, was it wonkish or whatever, that it just never, like gets into the media, and like, it doesn't fit into a soundbite, so it doesn't get thoroughly explored. But I feel like that's the type of like approach that would really be useful, is like to really have like a hard look at proposed solutions, and like for the ones that are already in place in other countries, like how well are they working. Same thing with healthcare or anything, like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we have some of those policies in place, and like the problem is that some of the things that we have, maybe somebody has gone through that analysis, but for instance, some of the things that we have just seem ridiculous to me. So, for instance, on the gun debate, there's this argument of the pistol grip versus the rifle grip. So the rifle grip on say a long gun is more sort of, let me see if I can get this. You're sort of holding it like this, versus a pistol grip is more like this, right?
Yeah.
Where you're actually holding the weapon. And on certain types of weapons in certain states, the pistol grip is illegal. The exact same weapon in the rifle grip is legal. It doesn't make any sense. Same thing with so there's the bump stock debate. This was popularized a few years back. The bump stock is basically a small apparatus that you put on the back of the rifle that butts into your shoulder, and what it allows you to do is that semi-automatic weapon, you can simply hold the trigger down, and it uses the recoil of the gun in such a manner that it will fire more rounds without having to continue to pull the trigger. And it's a function of how the engineering works. And so, okay, you can ban them, you can make them illegal, and then you can go onto YouTube and you can search for the guy who creates a bump stock out of his belt loop on his pants, and he turns that exact same weapon into essentially a bump stock using his belt loop. So, like, what are you talking about? What are you trying to change here? I mean, and I think you have to confront the realities of, say, the engineering side of this. That, like you're saying, guns exist. This stuff exists. So you can put all these half-baked measures in, And for instance, the state of New York, where I used to live, has so many of these stupid rules, just like what I'm talking about, that from my point of view are completely irrelevant. They don't do anything. All they do is piss people off,
Right. Yeah.
and you're not stopping anything. So, but it's another example of like a feel good policy that some politician can point to and say, "Hey, I got this through because I care about gun control," and say that to their constituents and sort of win votes. Meanwhile, at the expense of reducing whatever freedom you want in that regard, and solving essentially nothing. All you do is piss off the people who do want those things. You don't change anything else, and you can still get them, right? You just drive to the
Right.
next state over and you get it.
I mean, maybe there's value in making things more difficult in some cases. Like you can't like that example with, you have to like figure out how to make your own bump stock or have to assemble these pieces together to make your own gun in California or whatever. Maybe that has some kind of like incremental effect in reducing, cause violence, because people, when they're really upset, like maybe they're not going to do that or go the extra steps. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I don't
maybe.
know. In general, I prefer less regulation on stuff. I don't know.
Right. To me, it's the old adage about locks. What is the point of a lock? You buy a master lock, you put it on your shed. What is the point of that? And the quip that you'll hear is, all a lock does is keep honest people honest, right? Because
Sure.
if you're an honest person, it doesn't matter if you're not going to steal from that shed. But maybe if you're wavering, and there's no lock, maybe you go in and steal something. But if you're a criminal and you're going to steal something regardless, the lock isn't going to stop you. You just cut it off, or you find some way to a different attack vector, essentially. So all it does is keeps the honest people honest. If somebody wants to get it, they're going to get it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like a deterrence mechanism, but it's
Right.
not going to be foolproof. Yeah.
But then it just gets into the same discussion we just had, which is, so all you're going to do is deny the sort of good citizen, essentially, who would be a good steward of that. You're going to deny them the chance to have whatever you're talking about, and you're still going to enable it for the criminal. Which then, again, just begs the question to me, what is the point of the policy to begin with? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I think part of my view just comes from like having been frustrated over having to deal with extra steps and just regulations that kind of get in the way. They don't seem to have like a big benefit, or
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the right solution is necessarily, because I mean, maybe some are actually just stupid and were just implemented for political points, feel good or whatever. Others were like well intentioned and just misguided. And then I'm sure there are some that are just a pain in the butt but are necessary. So
Sure. What do you think about uh, the suicide angle? Is that more suicides happen with guns? I think this is true than anything else in this country. And we saw those statistics about there's even more suicide deaths from guns per year than murders.
yeah, that's an interesting one because I mean the thing about suicide, right, is you hear it as a permanent solution to a temporary problem, which having like gone through periods in life where I was kind of depressed and whatnot, like I get that. Like depression can come and go, and can be a temporary thing. And so if you were to respond to that with ending your life, then that's like a permanent response to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I mean, you don't want to like make it like excessively easy for people to kill themselves because you want that. But I don't. I'm not comfortable saying like I don't think suicide necessarily should be illegal either. Like
Right.
if someone wants to do that with their life, like it's their life, and you know
It's the sort of assisted suicide debate, or
Yeah, yeah, and
the
if you want to help somebody who wants to end their their life, then like I don't necessarily see what's wrong with that. Again, like just kind of erring on the side of freedom. Why should you force somebody to stay alive that does not want to stay alive? But I would hope that they would have really like thought through that decision carefully and like really
right.
reflected on the implications and like took some time to think about that, you know.
That's
Uh,
yeah. That I actually I want to talk about that more. I'm just going to put a note to come back to that because I think that would be an interesting discussion that's sort of related to this. But specifically, so I mean, even in our first episode, we talked extensively about our dad, and I mean, like I said, he killed himself with a shotgun. And when I've thought about this, like let's say that magically all guns were banned and there weren't any guns in the country, and he couldn't get his hand on any gun. Do you think that that would have made a difference, or do you think he just would have found another way?
I know he was thinking of other ways. So I think, I mean, Dad was very determined when he set his mind to something. So if he decided that he wanted to kill himself, I think he would have done it or attempted to do it. If he didn't have a gun to do it, he probably would have done one of the other ways he was thinking of. Like I know he was thinking of, and he actually had this like big steel I-beam that he was going to put in the back of his van behind the driver's seat, and he was going to drive really fast and like smash into a tree and have that thing impale him. So
Wow.
like that was something he was thinking about, and he showed the beam to Mom and I, like, you know, and that might have been a worse thing because
Right.
he might have like critically injured himself or like permanently disabled. Like it could have ended up being like some like horrendous injury, lots of suffering, and he's
Still alive.
suffering through that versus just like the quick you know gunshot. So I don't know, like if someone is really determined that they want to do that, I don't know if it's necessarily right to prevent them to try to obviously to try to talk them out of it, yes, like to try to help them work through that process and not want to do that. But I don't I don't know if like preventing gun ownership is a viable way. I mean,
Right. Right.
it would probably decrease suicides because it would decrease the
Accessibility.
ease. Yeah, accessibility. Like you would have to be really determined and then think of an idea like that I-beam, and then you'd have to have the courage to like get up to speed and go through with it, which
Sure.
would probably be a little bit more difficult than just pulling a trigger
Having
because
a moment of courage.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it requires like a longer moment to continue to be making that decision versus
Yeah.
just quickly pulling a trigger. So
Yeah. It's a really difficult topic. I didn't know that about the I beam. That's well, it's interesting to hear. But yeah,
yeah.
I have thought for some time that I've committed thought to this over the years that I fully think that he would have found some other mechanism, and in that day, this is why I've talked to a therapist about this, like where they've asked me if I have any guilt surrounding my father's death, and I honestly don't. And in that week where it happened, we had like like an upcoming plan. I think that weekend or something, we were going to go ride motorcycles or something together,
Huh.
and I sort of canceled on him that day. Like
Oh
the
wow.
day before, I was like, there was some party or some friend was doing something coming up, and I wanted to do that instead. And so I basically canceled it with Dad. And when
Huh.
I've thought about this, I'm like, man, like it would be really easy to feel guilty. I could see how someone would feel guilty in this position, like, oh, because I canceled, I caused him to, kill himself the next day or whatever. But I've never felt that for whatever reason, and I think internally I recognize that it was sort of bigger than me,
Oh
like
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
it's regardless of whether he did it, that day or the next day or the next week or the next year. I don't know that there was, at least on the trajectory that he was on, that there was a way to stop it, short of some other, I don't know, sort of some other kind of intervention that I wouldn't have been privy to anyway. So like I legitimately have never felt guilty about it, and I don't think I should. And the therapists I've talked to have been like, yeah, of course, you shouldn't feel guilty about it. But like
Yeah.
that's an example to me of whether it was that day or the next day, whether it was with a gun or putting attaching a hose to the muffler and killing yourself
All
from
right.
carbon monoxide. Like there's ways to do it, like um, or driving off a tall bridge or something. I mean, there's it's accessible. It's accessible enough.
Right.
Does the gun make it quicker and easier? Yes. Does it drive up the gun statistics? Yes. But I'm not sure if that in and of itself is a bad thing. Kind of like what you're saying. So I feel like if you're evaluating these numbers when you're talking about guns, you sort of have to exclude suicide via gun, because there's so many other things going on when you're talking about that kind of a death.
Right. Yeah.
So actually, yeah. So if you don't mind, we've been, gosh, it's already an hour and a half. Um, I think the assisted suicide debate, that is not something we had written down, but
Yeah.
that's a really interesting tangent.
Yeah.
Because so there's a couple different angles to this. One of them is you're sort of healthy, normal, whatever person, and you just want to die, and you can talk we can talk about that. The other one that is I think a much easier win is the sort of, I've heard it being described as like death with dignity. So
Yeah.
say you're like in some terminal disease situation, or you've got some like painful cancer or something that is just you're going to die sort of imminently, but it might get dragged out over the next few years or something. And should that person have a right to sort of choose to go out on their own terms, like electively choose, I guess, effectively suicide, but not certainly not. I mean, there certainly aren't, there need to be restrictions there and there need to be people involved. And I think some countries, I want to say Switzerland, but I don't know if that's correct, have started to implement this kind of stuff where I think you have to get evaluated by like a psych board or something and make sure that you're making this decision, in sound mind, and that, you have some kind of terminal disease or whatever it is. And then, I mean, they let you do it, it's basically state assisted suicide, and the state helps you kill yourself, basically. Pretty crazy. But I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
it seems like that's another one of those things that it's a really painful topic, but I mean, how can you tell somebody that's in excruciating pain that's going to die in 6 months that they have to wait the 6 months? I mean, until the cancer like literally kills them. I don't know. Like, can't you just load them up with a bunch of morphine or something? And like, I mean, that must be a better experience than
Yeah.
slowly
You're like
rotting to
condemning
death.
them to suffering
Yeah.
that if that they don't want to do in that case if they're trying to get approval to commit suicide. I guess the two like potential complications would be if there's some kind of like maybe someone is like blackmailing them or somehow coercing a person to decide to do suicide, like threatening their family if they don't, or whatever it is. And in that case, like I think that would be more of like a case of murder
Right.
because it's not like a freely your own free volition making the choice. It's you're getting coerced.
Hmm.
Um, and that might not always be easy to determine when that happens or whatever. But and then the other thing is, what are the implications for like life insurance?
Oh,
If
true.
someone you know legally you know commits suicide or even gets like state help to do that, does that invalidate life insurance? Like what happens to their dependents or beneficiaries or whatever? Those are kind of
I would
interesting
imagine
topics.
not, but so at least so I after I got married, I started making sure that I had appropriate amounts of life insurance. Um, my fear being that my wife got pregnant, and then literally the next day I would get hit by a bus or something, like
Right.
some freak event, and that I wanted to make sure that at least like her and the baby would be okay. And so I started shopping around, and I ended up, I think, not most, but a lot of employers offer some amount of life insurance, and then
Sure.
which mine does, and then I ended up buying a supplemental term plan on top of that. And anyway, I say this because in the terms of the policy, it says that they will not pay out for suicide if it happens within 2 years
Oh,
of
right.
the start
Yeah.
of the plan. I mean, which I can see the reasoning for that. Like, oh man, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to go ahead and sign up for an insurance plan, then kill myself, and they can have a big payout. So that, I mean, I can see
Yeah.
some restrictions being, put in place there. But and I don't know if this is typical of most plans, but at least the ones that I shopped around, this seemed pretty typical. So that in year 5 or something, if I committed suicide, the policy would still pay out. So I would assume it would maybe be the same in those kind of
Yeah. Maybe.
situations, but I think it would probably depend on the specifics of the plan.
Yeah. And maybe too, like if you're committing suicide because of a terminal illness or whatever, versus like you just get depressed. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just when you bought the plan, you're not planning on doing that, and then you go past that provision, that 2-year window, whatever it is, then you know, I don't know. I don't think
Yeah,
it'd be a big issue either way because most people are not going to choose to commit suicide. So
yeah. The I'll just share this because it made me think that I had seen this before. Oregon, state
oh,
of Oregon, actually has a Death with Dignity Act. Allows terminally ill individuals to end their lives through voluntary self-administration of lethal medications, expressly prescribed by a physician for that purpose.
interesting. So then you can't have like a nurse or somebody help you administer that. You have to inject yourself or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. My guess is that they probably set it all up, and then there's like a button or something that you have to push or something.
Oh yeah.
I would mean by I don't know. That would be my guess. I would think you wouldn't want to let them accidentally like administer a partial dose,
Yeah.
and like cripple them in some way.
Man, that would be a crazy moment. You're sitting there and push this button and you're gonna I guess the same thing with like pointing a gun at yourself and with your hand on the trigger. Like that is a crazy situation to be in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but at least in this case, I think so. Like this is another great example of why I like the state system. Like this is not a federal thing. The state of Oregon has this law from 1997. Actually, I'm really surprised that it's that old.
Yeah.
Um, but like, let the states, figure it out on their own. And Oregon has decided to do this. And my guess would be that if you're somebody who doesn't live in Oregon, that I'm curious to see what the rules are. Like, could you travel to Oregon specifically for this purpose?
Yeah. It's probably under FAQ.
Yeah, probably. Um, but it makes sense. But I mean, even if you couldn't, like, what do you need to do? Like, if you're already on this mindset and you're gonna do this, I mean, is it really gonna stop you to move to Oregon and establish residency and whatever the rules are, and then you can do it? I mean, I think it's a great example of how the state system should work. Maybe somebody in I don't know Oklahoma doesn't want to have this, and so they don't have it. But let Oregon have it.
Yeah.
The federal
Exactly.
government doesn't need to be involved.
Yep. I think that makes sense.
What do you think about like somebody without the terminal illness, though? Somebody who's just either depressed or for one reason or another they want to end their life.
Maybe, there should be some kind of like mandatory waiting period or some kind of like counseling or something just to like make sure that, like give them an opportunity to really think through and make sure that, you know, they know what they're doing, they know the implications, like like they're certain about that decision. But I don't think it should be illegal. Like, it's
Yeah,
it's I mean, it's one of those like super personal decisions. Like, you know, everyone's life is their own.
Yeah, it's certainly another wrinkle. Um, I would hope that if somebody's in that situation, that I guess I would want resources to be available to that person to, I mean, see if you can sort of turn the ship around.
Yeah,
Like you're
yeah,
saying, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Like maybe you can get over the hump. Maybe you're just in a particularly difficult season of life, or there's some extenuating circumstances or something. But I mean, especially for a younger person to forego the chance at another 50 years of life is that's a big decision.
yeah.
So I don't know about that one. Although while you were talking, it made me think that I just Googled, and Switzerland does have this
Oh, yeah.
um, since 1942. Assisted suicide, as long as the motives are not selfish. All forms of euthanasia are against the law. So it's like forcibly, I
Oh,
guess.
interesting.
But yeah, so here's Britons. So people from Britain traveling to Switzerland to kill themselves,
I
basically.
wonder how they determine what motives are selfish versus not selfish. I mean, it is kind of an inherently selfish decision, right? Like you want to stop suffering, like whatever that the cause of that suffering is. But I mean,
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know how you
I'm
determine that.
not sure of the details, but um, I mean, it's a tricky subject, and maybe it doesn't make you feel good, but to your point, like, are you going to tell somebody that they absolutely can't do it? And then what happens? Well, that's why you have, you know, 20,000 or whatever suicides by gun every year. Is that, I mean, people eventually, if they really want it, they'll just take it into their own hands.
Yeah, I wonder if there would be like maybe not. I don't know if it would make sense, but maybe there's an argument for more restrictions on it if you have dependents. Like if you have
Mm.
kids that are depending on you, maybe like that should remain illegal. Unless you're terminally ill or something. I don't know.
It's a good
Or maybe
point.
it shouldn't. I don't know. What do I know?
What do we know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of angles to it. Uh, like I said before, I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions, but I do think I really like your point that you make a lot about erring on the side of freedom.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard for me to tell somebody specifically what they can and can't do in their life, even if I disagree with it. And I wouldn't want someone to kill themselves, but um, like I said, if they really want to do it, they're going to do it anyway. So maybe it's kind of like the prostitution angle. People are gonna do it. People are gonna offer it, whether or not it's illegal. So number one, you might as well like make it legal and be able to control it in a safe environment. Plus, the state can make some money off of it,
Sure.
and you don't have to deal with the sort of seedy underbelly of a black market and driving all this stuff underground, that and all the the downsides that causes. Um,
Yeah. Or
not
at least you reduce that black market and all
Sure,
that.
sure,
Yeah.
and not that making it legal under whatever restrictions will solve all those problems. There are going to be downsides that come along with that as well, but uh, to me, it's a much more manageable alternative. And even in this country, there are places where it's legal. I think that specifically, it's only one county in Nevada, but it is
Hmm.
legal. They have um, places where you can go. So in every other city, it exists, but it's not legal per se, right?
Yeah.
I guess you're not eliminating it.
Yeah. And I think, there's a spectrum too. Like some of that stuff would make sense to legalize and regulate. And then some of it is worth to continue to prohibit and enforce that prohibition.
Sure.
Same thing with drugs, like harder drugs, more dangerous, addictive or destructive drugs. Like probably worth continuing to fight those, you know. But it's yeah, choosing battles really, you know,
Yeah,
investing public resources smartly,
wisely. Yeah,
and where possible, pushing that decision down to the local level. I think makes sense.
yeah, definitely.
So, what is this John Rawls stuff? You had it on the list a couple times, but we
Yeah, I
haven't
was
ever
actually
got to
just
it.
gonna stop, but yeah, we can cover that. We're at an hour 45. We'll go a little bit longer.
Okay.
I've meant to talk about this a couple times. Um, this is a complete transition, but from what we have been talking about. But it's this idea, this philosopher John Rawls, who's 20th century philosopher, and there's this. The idea is called. It's known as the veil of ignorance, and it's basically a thought experiment. I should hopefully get at least the broad strokes correct, even if I don't get some of the specific facts correct. But basically, he posed this thought experiment, and it's a way to sort of think about public policy, I suppose, when you're considering, how to organize society or a government or whatever policy. And basically, in a nutshell, the idea is imagine that you like haven't been born yet, and you're sort of, looking down at the earth as a would be citizen of the planet, but you don't know, you haven't been born yet. You don't know where you're going to be born. You don't know to what kind of parents you're going to be born, to what kind of economic status. And so the idea would be when considering, and so that is sort of the veil of ignorance, as it were. You're ignorant about where, what your lot in life is going to be, essentially. And so the idea is, given, say, a proposed piece of public policy, how would you want to organize society or organize a policy, or what policies would seem fair? What would you enact? How would you, from that position of ignorance, what would you choose to do in society in terms of how, like what would the rules be? And I'm probably butchering some of that, but the general idea that I think he's suggesting is that it sort of makes sense logically that you would want a world where it's as fair as possible, because you don't know, you might be born as a kid in a third world country and have no opportunity, right? And, I mean, you don't even have to go at the world stage. Like, just go on the national stage. The world. I mean, with sovereign countries, it kind of gets more difficult. But go on the national stage. Like, you don't know if you're going to be born to affluent parents in Connecticut or in the boonies in Mississippi, and to across the economic spectrum. So the idea is that you would potentially want to put in place policies that make it as fair as possible, because you want to optimize your outcome in both situations. So that's the sort of idea about the veil of ignorance. And so an example might be, so this gets I've seen this used sort of in both ways, both for to be able to push different political agendas. Honestly, like, it makes sense if you're on, say, the American left of, well, of course, so we have to make everything equal. You need single payer health care. You need strong I don't know, like, strong support for welfare programs and food stamps. These are all justifications for making the world seemingly as fair as possible. And you can also go from the other side, which is, sort of, well, you just, regardless of kind of where you are, you're not looking for equal outcome, but you're sort of looking for the equal opportunity. You're looking for the opportunity to advance in life, right? So, and then you can, whatever policies come from that, you could talk about. And then, so I don't know. It's more of a thought experiment, some of which I think is useful, but it's easy to like sort of weaponize that and say like, well, obviously, you know, if somebody is rich and they're supporting a policy that is going to help sort of the rich stay rich, you know, of course that makes sense because they're acting in their own self-interest. But if you're trying to do it, say, for the good of society, it could be helpful to operate from this veil of ignorance to optimize for all citizens as opposed to, you know, select interest groups.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be like a good tool to use to uh, solve questions for like that instruments become institutions issue. Like like you said, so you're focused on what's good for people as a whole instead of like specific groups or organizations that have their own interests that have developed over time.
Right.
But yeah, and then also like what exactly is the outcome that's being optimized for? I think that would be kind of probably dependent on the person to some extent, like what they value, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
That-
yeah. And it's are you? I mean, it sort of gets into fundamental questions about society. Like we've sort of agreed in the social contract that we don't really want people dying in the streets, right? So like that's why um, you know, you can walk into any hospital, regardless of what you think about healthcare in this country. You can walk into any hospital and you'll at least get you'll at least get healthcare, regardless of what your status is. Now, maybe you can't afford to pay for it after the fact, or you know, there's all kinds of questions about medical debt, but um, that seems to be a part of the social contract that we've come up with, where like, hey, if you're gonna die in the street, like, yeah, you can at least go to the hospital and they'll take care of you. You know. Um, So like that seems good to me, but then there are other ones that are not as intuitive. Like when you start talking about um, welfare and you know, the programs that came out of the Great Society 50 years ago with the sort of war on poverty. Uh, it's one of those where it's like it sort of feels good and it seems good, but is it really good? You know, is it actually having the intended effect? I don't know. And this is another very challenging topic to discuss because, like, I don't really want to remove the food stamp program. Like, I don't really want, or like, there's WIC, you know, women, infants, and children. I don't really want a newborn baby not to have food. Like, that's not a good outcome. But at the same time, I'm not sure. I think those programs are easily abused. You know, it's like there's it's not clear to me um, what the right path is, I suppose. So it's great, like the veil of ignorance in that sense. It's useful to be like, well, of course, we need like a welfare program because I could be born to that poor mother and single mother in Mississippi or whatever, and there's no money, and I want to be able to eat as a newborn baby. So we need programs to ensure that. That makes sense. I don't want a newborn baby to not be able to eat. I don't think anybody wants that. But that's also the reality in a lot of parts of the world, you know? Like I don't know. I'm not sure what the policies are supposed to be.
yeah.
I'm very suspect of the corruption that can be introduced from policies like that, and how the war on poverty has essentially, if the goal was to wage a war on poverty, meaning to reduce or eliminate it, it certainly has not done that because it's been largely unchanged for 50 years. So then it's like, well, what is this money even doing? We're spending all this money on these programs. It's not making a difference. Is that what's happening? I don't know.
Yeah, or could be promoting dependency, you know.
Right. Right.
But
And that's why we should talk about universal basic income at some point. Maybe not on this episode, but it gets in to this idea of UBI, and like, of course, nobody wants people to go hungry, but like you're in some ways you're incentivized to stay on those programs, and it creates a dependency on the government. And then what ends up happening is that the government hasn't solved any problem. They've in some cases they've made it worse. You know.
yeah, I think the argument for UBI has probably changed over or the support for it has probably changed since all the COVID stimulus. Yeah,
Well,
because
yeah, I mean, look at what's going on with inflation.
yeah,
Does anybody actually think that the inflation we've seen the last year is not being affected at all by government policies from the previous 2 years?
right, yeah.
Come
No,
on.
they increased the money supply by 40% or something crazy. Like that's yeah, it's going to happen. Inflation. But yeah, it sounds like that veil of ignorance is definitely a useful tool for uh, like thinking about different policies and different like outcomes or potential outcomes from policies. I don't know. Policies are just. I think I just keep coming back to the idea of decentralizing stuff. Like,
Hmm.
uh, why is there even like a federal initiative for anti-poverty uh, policy? Why isn't that just done on the state level? Like, I mean, maybe I'm sure there's probably some argument for it, but it just seems like that should be more of like something on the state or like the local level. That should be something to be pushed down. Like I don't know. This probably gets into a whole other topic, but like at the federal level, probably there's only a few things that really need to be solved at that level. Like defense being one of them, and maybe like broad uh, like structural rules for the markets and whatnot. But
Yeah, well, I
kind
mean,
of
the Constitution, literally the point of the Constitution is to outline exactly the powers of the federal government. And then it literally says everything else is left up to the states.
yeah,
Now, how much do we embody that in this day and age? Not much. It seems like most of our politicians don't really care about that. But
yeah,
I'm with you. And honestly, like if you take that decentralized approach to the extreme, think about like soup kitchens in your local community or like charities, churches, reaching out to homeless people or whatever. I mean, the best argument I think against those overarching government programs, they say, well, who is going to take care of these people, right? And it seems to be like before we had any of the Great Society programs of the '60s. Um, are we to assume that there just weren't poor people, there weren't hungry people, there weren't people in poverty? Of course they were there, but I think like the argument that I've heard is that the local community sort of picked up more slack. Like you could go to your local soup kitchen. There were ministry programs from the local church or whatever to try to feed the feed the hungry or whatever, and that there were avenues to help those people, but it was not being done by the federal government. In some
yeah.
cases, not even being done by the state government. Literally being done by private citizens or private businesses.
And I'm sure that's still true, to some extent. Like there are
Sure.
local homeless and like food banks and whatnot, um, charities that address those issues. But and then there is something to be said about economies of scale and like efficiencies that come from like scaling out organizations. But I don't think you necessarily need to go like to the federal government for that. Like that could just be like private organizations or nonprofits or whatever that scale out and
Right.
can can address those needs. But I don't know. I think a lot of it too is just like for a lot of things we all kind of want the same stuff. Like we don't want people to suffer needlessly. We want to have opportunities to better yourselves and or ourselves and like we don't want like people to be stuck without a home or sick or whatever. But it just comes down to implementation details. Like
Yeah.
how do we address that? It's kind of crazy that people get so like polarized and up in arms and like the tribalism and everything, and they just like to the point like people fight, like physically assault each other over politics, and it's just crazy. It just it takes on a uh, whole nother like emotional intensity.
Yeah. It's very strange.
Yeah,
I don't know why all this vitriol has come about in society all of a sudden. Um, And I don't think it would be fair to say that it's from any particular group. You see it on
It's
certainly both
everywhere.
sides of the aisle. But I mean, any given position.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'm sure like social media has something to do with it and like echo chambers and all that. And probably just media in general. And like, where like cable came on and there are all these channels and internet came and infinite channels. And so you can get pigeonholed. Um, and I mean, I know we're been going on, so probably won't talk much about the detachment episode that Jocko had out lately, but
Yeah.
recently. But one of the points he made in there was just the importance of active listening, like really like setting aside your perspective uh, and like listening to whatever that other person is saying and like drawing like figuring out appreciating the context of it and like linking it back to like contexts that you have and like understanding the story and just like really like engaging with it and like understanding that perspective. I don't think there's a lot of that happening anymore, like on a lot of like political discourse, unfortunately. Just
Yeah.
people like they have their opinions that they've formed or they've absorbed from wherever, and then like they just don't want to look at the other side of it or appreciate the nuances in that discussion. I don't know.
Sure. You don't want to be wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
That that's inconvenient to confront it. It makes me think of. I think I saw. I think I was just on Reddit or something this week, and I saw some post about a video. I didn't actually watch the video, but I thought the post was intriguing. The post was basically about it was like spend less time reading and more time thinking, more or less. About
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the I think I like clicked on the little blurb, but I didn't like I said I didn't watch the video, and it was basically making the case for, hey, reading is great. It's a great way to learn, but you should spend a lot of time thinking for yourself as well, right? So not everybody is reading, biographies of John Adams and getting historical context. They might just be reading a bunch of crap about some viewpoint that they think, right? And
Right.
so then they just
Yeah.
get reinforced, or they're looking for some possibly, high profile pseudo intellectual or pundit to craft their opinion for them rather
Right.
than actually considering, say, the facts of a given situation and thinking about it for themselves. Which I think is interesting because I'm certainly not against reading by any means and learning, but maybe that's something that's missing in sort of the modern day ecosystem is setting time aside to think for yourself, free
Yeah.
of being indoctrinated in any given direction, and really challenging yourself what you think and believe. So I might have to go back and find that video because it's kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah. It's I think it takes more effort to think through things versus just like scan through an article. you know
Yeah.
and I know from like my own experience there's been times where like what I really want to do is like sit down and write a little essay about whatever topic and like think through it and like find some conclusions and kind of just get kind of like get a sense of closure on how I think through that topic, at least at that moment. But what I end up doing often is I'll just read, relevant articles or something or stories, news stories, and never actually like sit down and like go through that effort of processing it for myself.
Right.
You know?
I do the same thing. I think that's
Yeah,
somewhat natural, and it's.
yeah,
I think it's why I really enjoy this format that we're doing because it's a little bit scary, honestly. To like, okay, I have to come up with something to say about my opinion and defend something on the fly about X, Y, and Z, and I'm sure there's plenty of things that I've gotten wrong just in this 2 hours we've been talking, but it kind of exercises a different part of the brain to be able to uh, I suppose, come up with those arguments to say, even if I've heard them before by other people. But you're not going to remember everything, and so then your brain is forced to sort of consider, like, oh, I can't remember why they thought they said this or whatever, but what do I think about that? You know, like if I'm going to opine on a given topic, I better know what I'm talking about. Like I want to feel like I'm speaking the truth, or at least trying to work towards something that makes sense. And that's why I really like the sort of approach that we have, where it's like, listen, I'm not suggesting that I have the right answer.
Right.
I'm just sort of explaining what's going on in my head and why I'm thinking the way that I do, and then we can both together talk and challenge those assertions from both of us, and hopefully grow because of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like active listening. You know,
Right.
like that's what we're both doing. Like kind of drawing, you know, linking things together, and like drawing relevant ideas and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I think it's just like something about focused dialogue,
Mm.
which I don't do nearly enough, or all that much really. You know, other than, well, I guess I do it at work for like specific work tasks, but yeah, it's really useful to have kind of like a open-ended conversation just about wherever it goes.
Yeah,
you know.
I agree.
So
Great. Well, let's call it there. This has been a really great discussion.
yeah,
Thanks for joining me on it, and we will catch you next time.
yep, sounds good.
All right. Bye.